Hello, everyone. We're having another casual conversation, and today we have the pleasure of talking to Tim Follett, CEO and founder of StructureFlow. Tim, welcome.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely. Pleasure to talk to you as well, Horace.
So we met a couple of months ago, and since we met a couple of months ago, some really big news has been hitting the media about StructureFlow. And that big piece of news is you have officially been adopted by Slaughter May and been rolled out to their lawyers. It's such an impressive piece of news. Tell us more about that.
Thanks very much. Yeah, no, it's really good news for us. Big step forwards. Obviously, very reputable, prestigious firm. And for us, it's a firm-wide deployment. So it's one of the biggest deals that we've done. It means that we're getting the software into a broad range of different practice areas across a firm, not just kind of where we've been focusing mainly on corporate banking, etc., but also kind of reaching into other pockets of the firm around kind of employment and tax and even disputes now as well. So it's really good news for us.
That's so impressive. And I saw your presentation at Legal Geek a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, hey, this is a lot deeper than I thought it was. It's not your standard PowerPoint. Here's a few lines and boxes. It actually is a file storage system. It does so much more. So tell us, well, what does it do today?
So yeah, there's a number of different pieces of functionality here. Effectively, what we're trying to build is a visual interface into legal structures and transactions. And the way we think about what we're doing is you're not just creating a two-dimensional diagram when you're working on a project in StructureFlow. You're creating a digital model of a legal structure or a transaction, which has a visual element to it, obviously, but it also has data and documentation sitting beneath that and sitting on top of a platform that allows for collaboration across all the various different stakeholders interested in a structure or a transaction.
I think one of the really interesting things is law's not a profession that you typically associate with visualization. And I think visualizing legal data is probably one of the hardest things out there because there's a big gap between words on the page and images that people can understand. And it's not just images for the sake of images, it's images that are understandable.
Yeah.
I spent a bit of time as a banking lawyer and also as an M&A lawyer. So I appreciate the beauty and the function of structure diagrams. So how did you come up with StructureFlow as an idea? Where did it come from? How have you grown it from paper to where it is today?
Where to start? I'll go back to the beginning. Maybe that's best. So I've always been very visual. Going back to when I was a kid, some of the books I enjoyed most were the books with pictures, history books about Romans and ancient Egyptians and little pictures and diagrams explaining things, Dorian Kindersley books, etc. And as I went through school and I went to university, that stuck with me. So when I was learning things myself, part of my kind of method of learning was creating diagrams. I studied history at university and I was creating diagrams then, timelines and mind maps. And then when I went into law school, because I converted from history to law, I started to see diagrams pop up in law school. So, when you're learning about certain topics for the first time, maybe that's financial assistance in a corporate context, or it's, structured subordination in a banking context, finance context, you start to see these diagrams pop up. And I started doing diagramming to help myself understand what was going on at law school. And then when I went into practice, I saw diagrams being used there, in the context of due diligence reports, in the context of tax papers and steps plans. I started to do quite a lot of work which was quite highly structured as well. I was doing quite a lot of pensions de-risking work. It was kind of quite complex, lots of different documents that all linked together, lots of different parties, lots of different contracts. So I was creating diagrams then as part of that, and I was sharing them with my colleagues, I was sharing them externally with clients. And as part of that process, I saw the benefits of visualization for a lawyer, but I also saw the frustrations that you have just using the current toolkit, PowerPoint, drawing in words or Excel, maybe a little bit of Visio, or you're using an external DTP team. Just trying to create these diagrams is hugely frustrating. Lots of messing around with shapes and lines, lots of back and forth with secretaries and external DTP teams, whatever it is, just to create something that looks good, makes sense, and yields the benefit of visualization to yourself and to the people around you. And that was where the idea for StructureFlow came from, really. It was a realization that there was no piece of tooling that was specifically designed to help people who are involved in structured transactions do their work and do it visually. Because as you said at the start, diagrams can be so much more powerful than text. The whole primacy of text is there. It's historic. It needs to be chipped away at, and I think that's beginning to happen.
It's like that old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I think that's what you're trying to bring to this industry. Have you got any statistics around how effective visualization is to uplifting performance of lawyers, however you measure that? But are there real tangible numbers that we can point to?
Yeah, I mean, there have been various studies that have come out of medical studies and management consulting studies around the effectiveness of visual communication. And you're looking at something between, on average, kind of 60 to 80% faster absorption and understanding of knowledge than just through text alone. And you can actually, there are games, if you do some Googling online, you can see there are games that you can play where you can test your understanding of things through both reading a block of text and then actually trying to understand the same thing through a diagram, and it's far quicker. And the human eye is it's evolved to be able to do this, because if you go far back, when we were sort of living on the plains of Africa and trying to hunt, and if we weren't successful in catching prey, then there were serious repercussions for ourselves and our families. The human eye evolved in that world, in that context, so that you could see differences. You were trained with the eye to be able to see information about the world around you that would enable you to be able to capture prey. And it's the same thing now. The human eye is incredibly capable of detecting differences and details. So yeah, it's only natural, I think, that this should filter through into the complex work that lawyers are doing.
So it makes perfect sense that from a legal text to legal information visualization perspective, that leap meant you're now aligning with the way that people think.
And there's an important point there, which is that I think in all lawyers' minds, when they're dealing with something, there is a mental image forming in their mind.
Mm.
And that mental image is what guides them and provides a framework for their understanding. Even in these complex transactions, even if there's no diagram, there is an understanding, a kind of mental model that's been built up by a person through conversations and reading and understanding all the different parties, etc. A lot of the language that lawyers use to talk about transactions are visual metaphors. So waterfalls, flows, cliffs, all of this, it's visual language.
It's a
And I think,
landscape painting.
even if someone doesn't draw it down on a piece of paper, that image is in their head anyway, I think.
Yeah.
And, what we're trying to do here is allow people to get that out of their head and onto something that is capable of being shared with other people as well. To make sure that, if you and I are talking about a yellow bicycle, that actually the way I'm kind of visualizing that yellow bicycle is the same way that you're visualizing that yellow bicycle. And I think that's hugely, hugely important. And I think by creating diagrams and thinking visually, it helps people get on the same page to make sure they're actually thinking about things in the same way.
I can see how powerful that is. I'm going to throw a bit of a challenge to you, a bit of a challenging question perhaps. And it comes from this idea that I read years ago, that there are 3 types of learners, and you might know where I'm going with this. They're the visual learners, the audio learners, and then they're the kind of kinesthetic learners. And StructureFlow seems really leaning towards accommodating the visual learners. And I wonder if that is a sort of rebuttal that you've had to think about, to kind of, how do you build your product so that all users benefit from this?
It's an interesting point. I mean, I'm someone that kind of I always try and kind of repel a little bit away from kind of binary things. Like, is there such a thing as a visual learner who's very distinct from being kind of an audio learner? I'm not sure. I suspect there's a bit of a sliding scale. Right. Look, I mean, our thesis is that there is a huge role for visualization and visual thinking and communication and analysis. That's not to say that that's at the expense of audio or doing as well, but undoubtedly the focus for us is in that kind of visual interface. It's no longer just a diagram. There's a visual interface into information here that you can interact with. And I think, for me, audio, I like listening to Audible. I like listening, I struggle to read books these days. I listen to podcasts and Audible. I love audio. Who knows? Maybe there's a way to bring some audio into StructureFlow.
That would be an interesting design exercise. If you ever decide to take on that enormous challenge, let me know, because I would be happy to just do a whiteboard session.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's a good question.
So one of the things that we, having a background in transactional in transactions, one of the things that I've always found really useful are steps plans, which you briefly mentioned earlier in our chat. And I don't know if you have this feature already in StructureFlow, but as well as having the kind of relational information on a page, do you have a timeline information on a page?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and you can show sequences of events in StructureFlow. So you can create steps plans in StructureFlow in the same way that you can in PowerPoint. We want to do more though with what I would call time as a vector. So time as a thing, not just forward looking, but backward looking as well. There's a huge amount one can do, not just with visuals, but with data. So without sort of revealing too much at this stage,
of course,
I can say that this is something that we're very, very much looking at the moment.
That is interesting. I think the scope for growth is enormous, because it is one of the underserviced functions that lawyers have never really had a tool that allows them to go, how does this look? Right, like it's a question that I remember being asked by a partner once upon a time, or by several partners, where you would explain something and then they go, well, how does it look? And then they'll point to the whiteboard, and it feels like this is the future way of doing this, especially in a world where remote working is probably here to stay.
Completely. And, there's some other great tools out there that have been helping as well in this environment.
We're using one right now.
We're using one right now. Exactly. But, shout out to other tools, Miro, for example. I mean, we have customers that use Miro and StructureFlow because, there is a obvious benefit with a kind of remote whiteboarding capability. You can't just walk into the room next door and draw something. So I think you're right. I think it's here to stay. And, even if you are in the same room, I mean, do you really want to be using a whiteboard all the time? Or is there a more intelligent way to do things now? Get StructureFlow up on both laptops and stick it on a big screen, right? And work together that way.
For me, I think there's a layer of benefit, almost like this nostalgia involved when you're using the old whiteboard. But you're right, it's not the most effective way. And what happens afterwards when people want to take a record of it? They have to snap a photo. So it makes a lot of sense for people to kind of move off this old world, apart from for nostalgia reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of being sort of playfully binary there. There is a role for a whiteboard, and there is a role for a piece of paper and a pen. It's a fantastic way to express yourself and to craft some thought quickly. But pros and cons depends what you're using it for.
Do you think that StructureFlow is one of those tools, and I think these are very rare, one of those tools that can cross language barriers with almost zero friction?
No, completely, 100%. We've had this feedback from customers as well, that they can see the potential for that. There is a kind of visual language that's developed around kind of legal structures and transactions and diagramming of them. And that is a language that can cross borders. Broadly, if you take a structure diagram and show it to a Japanese, a lawyer in Tokyo speaking Japanese, and show it to a lawyer in New York speaking English, they will look at it and they will understand, broadly the same thing from it.
That's really interesting. So there's no kind of cultural differences in the way that these sorts of diagrams are represented, or are the differences so small that the visual language can transcend these barriers?
Broad conformity across people in different parts of the world. Yes.
Wow.
It's just stuff like a hierarchy, like a group structure chart hierarchy, right? People tend to understand that you have parent companies that sit above subsidiaries, etc. You have slightly different context though. Like interestingly, talk to a KYC person, and they tend to, when they're doing KYC, they actually tend to start from the bottom and then go upwards. And you sometimes not so much language barriers, but kind of mental model that they can be different.
And I'm guessing StructureFlow is flexible enough so that it can work both top down and bottom up.
Correct.
Amazing. Final question for me. Future direction for StructureFlow. Where do you see yourself going in the next 12 months?
So we're going to be building out the product significantly over the next 12 months, really enhancing the data capability and also the collaboration capability within the product. Today, we've got 3 areas within the application: visualization, data, collaboration. There's been a heavy focus on visualization. We're going to be now moving more towards data and collaboration.
Oh, I have so many questions about that, but I'm not going to ask them today. And instead, I'm going to patiently wait for the release of your product to learn more about data and to learn more about collaboration. So Tim, thank you very much for this chat. I have learned so much, and I think it's fascinating. I wish you every success. I think I've met almost every member of your team during the Legal Geek conference.
Cool, nice.
So I look
I hope
forward
they
to seeing you and everyone else in your team succeed and go on to do great things.
Thank you very much. No, it's been a pleasure to have a chat with you again. And yeah, we look forward to talking again.